Namaste and welcome to Youth and Development, produced by today's Youth Asia. In the TV show Youth and Development, we bring young leaders face to face with the key players of development work. My name is Rosina, and today we have with us Ms. Marcia Marsh, the Chief Operating Officer of World Wildlife Fund. Ms. Marsh is the graduate of Randolph-Macon Women's College, studied international politics at the University of Virginia, and is a certified public accountant. She also serves as executive lead for CARE-WWF Alliance, a partnership addressing the linkage between poverty and environmental degradation.
You have been the lead executive for CARE-WWF Alliance, which addresses linkages between poverty and environmental degradation. What were your major responsibilities?
So the major responsibilities continue, and in fact, that's the reason that I'm here in Nepal, is to kick off the alliance in Nepal. I lead a group of colleagues from around the world, from the very large CARE organization, which is made up of thousands of people in countries around the world, and the 5,000 members of WWF. And we pulled together colleagues first in Mozambique and now in Nepal to collaborate on issues around forest management, working with communities, working on enhancing livelihoods, looking at women, women's rights, health, and all sorts of other things. And it's a very exciting opportunity to marry the two strengths of large organizations in development conservation. So I'm the captain of the ship, just make sure that all the crew comes together and we bring together the best to work with the government and communities in Nepal to see if we can create a bright future.
What was the driving force that led you to this field?
Okay. I'll tell you a secret, since you're young and you're probably thinking about what you want to do in your careers, and people always ask me, how do I find my way in my career? How do I decide what to do next? I started out in management. I started out at Price Waterhouse. I was a partner there, and I worked in international tax. So I worked in business for 23 years in consulting. And one day I thought, boy, that's a lot of work just in the private sector. I think I'd like to do something that gives back to the community. And at the time, I started working on trying to reform the U.S. government. That's a big challenge. And somewhere along the line, I saw this in the newspaper, the Panda brand, the distinctive Panda brand, and I turned to my husband and said, do you think I could work for them, this remarkable organization? So it was one of those occasions late in a career where I sent a resume in to WWF and said, do you have an opportunity? They had a management role. So I started in management and the private sector and came to conservation with those skills after 20, 30 years career already. So happenstance, but one that I'm extremely happy with. It's been a wonderful, wonderful opportunity.
How does the use of information technology help in environment conservation?
In so many ways. So if you think about how information technology touches you in your daily lives, Facebook, Twitter, a variety of different things, it's a communications vehicle that allows people to see the work that we're doing, to provide comments, to help advocate for things, whether it's Earth Hour or climate change and advocacy within the U.S., speaking to the Congress about laws and rules that will change things for the better in terms of conservation. So communications is one. Second is we use that same information technology in the science that allows us to protect species. So radio collaring animals, we've really developed a very sophisticated technology that will allow you now to follow an animal to see how far the animal's range is, what they need, and every year, just as your cell phones improve and your computers improve, that technology improves to help us learn more about our planet, about how we use our planet and other things. So radio collars, another thing that we're doing right now that's really exciting in Nepal, where Nepal may be a model for the rest of the world, is in using LIDAR, so satellite technology, to measure how much forest carbon you have in the amazing forests that are here, which are really important. That's what's going to protect us from global greenhouse emissions. It helps to sequester carbon, and being able to measure that will allow us to see how important Nepal is in the world scheme, and hopefully will make Nepal ready to accept financing from carbon markets, which could go to communities and others to preserve forests. So that technology is going to help us deliver benefits on the ground. So all from information technology, multiple uses from communication to science.
How has CARE-WWF Alliance been working to, mitigate the environmental problems?
Right, so our first CARE-WWF Alliance project is actually in Africa. That's the pilot project. And there we've been working in coastal fisheries communities. So these communities are very, very poor. They live in very remote places. And because of large-scale industrial trawling, pulling up fish from the bottom in large nets, those communities are seeing smaller and smaller fish stocks, to where when people go out, they'll put out a net and they come back and the tiniest fish are left for the communities there. So we've been working with CARE, with the communities, on declaring fish sanctuaries, and they've been patrolling those and helping us to define the boundaries, working on conservation agriculture so that while the fish supply is recovering, they have the opportunity to grow cassava and yams and other things to help both provide nutrition and also markets. So we've been combining our strengths. They're great in agriculture, community work, microfinance. We're fantastic in forestry, marine, all the things you think about when you think of WWF. So in that pilot project, which is now 3.5 years old, we've already seen better crops, better incomes, the fish coming back, and most importantly, communities saying we want more. We'd really love to work with you into the future. So here in Nepal, we've just started our conversations about what those partnerships might be like, probably in community forestry. So we'll have 2 wonderful world examples of community fisheries, community forestries. So we're really excited about building a future around that here.
Do you believe that imposing carbon tax is an effective way to reduce carbon emissions? How feasible is it?
So I think there's a great deal of consensus across economists worldwide, and certainly within the WWF teams that are negotiating for how we mitigate the impacts of emissions, that putting a price on carbon is critical. Bringing markets and the millions and billions to bear from markets into the equation is really going to help us deal with things much more quickly. So in the U.S., for example, we advocated for the last few years to have a carbon tax legislation, a cap-and-trade system. We weren't successful. We've had new elections. It's going to take us a few years to build the political will and impetus to make it work, but it's something that we work on constantly. And WWF as a network works in world capitals to try and make sure that that's happening around the world.
There are a lot of people who are so skeptical on the topic of climate change. What, according to you, is the most effective way of making people realize of this imposing threat?
Well, that's a really interesting question, and we've been trying to understand why in particular the U.S. population seems to have such a hard time with this, when many people in the rest of the world are less skeptical about man-made contributions to climate change. So we've been doing a lot of research on that. And recently, there's one of the universities in the U.S. that has tried to study the psychology of a public to determine why it is people feel that way. And their research shows that the topic is so overwhelming and the challenge looks so huge that people put it to the back of their brain. And when you can get them to focus on solutions, how do I adapt in my community to floods? How do I work on droughts? How do I work on infestations and bugs that might impact the trees that we have around it? It moves it to the front of their mind, and they're much more open then to think about climate change and what those implications are. So we're working on a program this year connected to Earth Hour, where we might engage communities on solutions with the hope that they'll think about the problem in the years to come.
Various conferences have been held to discuss, about environment degradation and the problems that our environment is facing. So have these talks been actually implemented and, have they been successful?
Different conferences have a lot of commitments, a lot of conversations, some have results. But the very fact that people come together brings energy around creating solutions. So one of the examples that came out of the conference on biodiversity that was just recently held was a focus on the world's oceans, the deplorable conditions out there, and the fact that many years ago the world made a commitment via the CBD conference to 10% of the world's oceans being covered by protected areas, so that we would see fish, you'd see fish, your children will see fish in the future. That hasn't happened. It's only 1.7%. But after that conference, I can tell you that WWF as a network came back yet again to recommit with all the marine projects we have out there to try and contribute to half that goal within the next 10 years with the spread and reach that we have of network and partners and others. So there's an example of momentum. Not curing all the ills, but it's just one example of what might come from one of those events.
You've been close to environment and environmental issues for a very long time. So have you seen any changes in the environment in the past and now? And what do you consider as the major factor behind this change?
Okay, so I've been involved with the environment 6 years, which for you young people probably is a long time, but it's not a whole career. But in that 6-year window, I've already seen a great deal of change. And I think one of the biggest changes is the involvement of the private sector. And the private sector involvement, not from the standpoint of marketing and goodwill, but from the standpoint of survival. And we have, within WWF, an initiative called Market Transformation, where we work with companies on trying to sustainably source products and only bring products to markets that are sustainably harvested, whether it's fish or forests or other things. And we have seen such an increase in corporate interest, whether it's here, whether it's in the U.S., whether it's in Europe. So I think the entrance of the private sector as part of the solution instead of only a contributor to the problem is probably one of the most exciting things I've seen change in the last 6 years.
Since you've been involved working with the environment for 6 years, like you just said, so what is that one thing that you'd want to change about your work?
It's actually what I think we'd like to grow in our work. So I love the notion, and we all have a commitment to engaging young people, the future, the next generations. And I'd like to turn the question back on the four of you, if you don't mind, to talk about how can an organization like WWF reach into your generation to bring you to us as part of a movement, to have you contribute your voice to change here, and to really make a difference and get involved in your community. What do you think?
WWF and we youth, and we collaborate with each other. We can, talk about the issues that we see around. The environmental issues that we see, the basic thing that we see every day. You see, person not taking care of the environment properly. So we could talk about that. We could discuss about that, and in a way work actually to solve those problems that we see.
How was your recent visit to Tarai?
Really interesting. So the last time I came to Kathmandu was 5 years ago, or to Nepal, and I spent all my time in Kathmandu, which was incredible, interesting, fantastic for someone who'd never been to Nepal before. So this visit, I had the opportunity to do about a week's worth of traveling from Bardia to Lumbini to Chitwan, and the opportunity to both see jungle safaris, nature, rhinos, grasslands, the edge of nature and the amazing things that you have in natural assets, and also meet with about a dozen communities that are working on grassland restoration, ecotourism, aquaculture, biogas villages. And I was really struck by how active the communities in Nepal are in taking ownership of their own futures and really being the stewards of the assets that they have. It was quite remarkable. And we saw so many young people out there from eco clubs. You were asking earlier about how do young people get involved. I think there are hundreds of young people across those communities that are involved after school hours in eco clubs where they learn about the environment and anti-poaching patrols and all sorts of other things. So I think I was struck by natural beauty, amazing history and remarkable things like in Lumbini. That was a once-in-a-lifetime experience and such a gem in a country. It was just an amazing morning. And then being able to see Chitwan, Bardia and all those things, it's just the whole reach of things that you have is quite incredible. So I would recommend to anyone that wants to come visit as a tourist to do it, and anyone who's interested in seeing really good government, community, civil society cooperation on the ground. This is a place to come see some models. And I'm going to go back to Washington and talk about a lot of the work we do here, show those pictures, and I'm really excited about the opportunities that you have to create even bigger models going forward. So, great trip.
What differences do you see in the way environmental works are being carried out in Nepal and in other countries?
That's an interesting question, too. When I contrast what I see here versus what I've seen in Latin America, with what I've seen in Africa and other parts of Asia, my sense is, from my 1 week, so I wouldn't be the greatest expert there, but that there's a greater collaboration between government, district, community, partners, that it's a sense of one strategy, one plan, common ownership, and a real willingness of people to work together. I was struck in Chitwan. We met with the chief warden who talked about their progress for the year and strategy. And the way in which he talked about it was the government projects that involved the park, the incredible partnerships in the buffer zones with the communities and community-based forest groups and cooperatives, with individual citizens, with scientists, with donors from around the world. There really is that sense of partnership, and it's there in other places. It just seems more real here and more consistent everywhere I go. So if I thought about the one thing, I would think about that. I'd also think about it's not what's different, but I think in the way in which you approach our work, what you have here in the way of biodiversity is remarkable. I think I shared with you guys earlier that I'd seen my first rhino, which you all take for granted. But you have this incredible rhino population, tiger population, snow leopards, red pandas, things that aren't as abundant in the rest of the world and don't appear in that same kind of combination. So the natural assets you have, mountains, grasslands, the amazing rivers you have, you've got this natural wealth that is quite remarkable too. So just looking at that and actually seeing nature up close, I think you have something that's really remarkable and different from many other places, and you're lucky.
How important is cultural diversity in preservation of animals?
Oh, that's, I'm glad I went to the Terai so I can answer that question, because in one of the communities that we visited, a place called Shiva, they have used some of the conservation money that's come back to the community to invest in, with their young people, learning about the culture, particularly the young women, the culture of their grandmothers, their dance, their music, the lore, that really reflected how important nature was and how critical it had been over the generations to their livelihood. So I feel like if we lose the diversity of culture that you have and some of the more historic aspects and move completely into modern life, modern construction, you lose your touch with nature. Don't you feel that? You live in the city, you go out somewhere, you see the difference. And when you really work with communities where their spiritual livelihood and other well-being carries on through the generations, through music, through dance, through festivals, there's a greater appreciation. So I think it's critically important, and I was really excited to see that as part of our conservation work and projects with those communities, they're focusing on keeping that culture alive and sharing it with the next generation. So I'm hoping each of you is keeping your roots alive and working with your families to maintain those connections, because it seems to me from my visit to Kathmandu, that's what makes sort of the magical potion and the magical combination that is Kathmandu, all the cultures and history coming together. So I think it's critical.
What is the next step that WWF will be initiating in Nepal?
Well, I can speak to the next step that WWF is going to be pursuing with CARE in Nepal and some of the general things that we're working on. So I came to help launch that next step, to begin the brainstorming process about what we could do together, two large organizations with multiple partners. So we're going to be working across the Terai in a variety of projects, and then in the connecting corridor that goes from north to south. So both permitting nature and freedom to roam for the species that are there, but also enhancing the communities that are there. So we're just currently working on the major ideas and plans and projects and opportunity to talk with all of our partners here about what that future might look like. For WWF, we'll continue to work in our sacred Himalayas landscape. We'll work on community conservation, community forestry. We're going to be working on water, such an important and vital element of life. So we're working in some of the major river basins on how do we protect the flow of water, particularly with climate change, with melting glaciers, with the issues there. How do we stay in front of that? How do we help communities adapt, but also protect those assets, keep the forests that protect the natural water flow and other things moving? So I think fresh water is a huge component of what we're doing. One of our Nepali team are among our more active in international forum around climate change. There's a climate summit that's going to be happening in Bhutan with leaders from the countries around here, and our team has been working there on how do we support the multi-country efforts, how can we raise awareness about the Himalayas and their critical role in providing water to this entire region. I mean, everyone should be focusing on how we help you maintain these assets that are so critical to everyone else. So I think climate, fresh water, continuing our work on these connecting corridors, livelihoods, innovation, that's all in the cards for us going forward. And then the last piece, and the reason I asked you the questions about youth is, we definitely have an ambition as a network to gather hundreds of millions of people around the world in one major, large-scale global movement for the environment and for conservation. And I know that here in Nepal, they clearly have a youth outreach strategy. So I was asking you those questions so that they'd have an opportunity to think about how they engage bright young people like yourselves in taking up the mantle and working on these things.
We students study about environment conservation in our schools, but what really happens out here is this knowledge of us is just limited to our textbooks. So we youths out here in the city areas, we are like, in a way, ignorant about. We tend to, ignore these issues. So what do you think we should do in order to, take up these issues seriously and work for it?
I think that availing yourselves of options to get involved with groups around recycling, becoming familiar with pollution, toxics, how to keep the local environment and rivers and other things clean. There must be opportunities here to get involved in things that are right in your backyard, something that you see every day and that you notice. So I'd say take some small steps to make sure that you start to become an example with your friends and in your communities around raising questions about what are we doing, how are we tackling waste, how are we dealing with various issues here, how are we maintaining energy efficiency and yet increasing access to energy for people. So I think young people have an opportunity through their studies, through their universities and groups to raise really good questions, to get involved at a grassroots level, and then find opportunities to try and get out in the fields, whether it's university programs or at WWF we have internships. So look into internships, whether it's with WWF or with other organizations, to find time between your school year to actually get out and do some hands-on projects and learn about things. And I think you all have a unique opportunity because of your communication skills and what you do to talk to people about conservation, to highlight those issues, to learn things, to find ways, whether it's via YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, to share comments that you've heard about what's happening in the Himalayas, what's happening in the Terai, what's going on with climate change, so you can make sure people are more aware, and you've got some unique skills that would help you do that.
Thank you, Ms. Marcia, for being with us today and sharing with us your insightful thoughts and ideas. Thank you for watching us. We look forward to your feedbacks. Our email address is youthtya@gmail.com. We will be back next week at the same time. Have a nice week. Namaste.